The neighborhood woke up to the thunder of a Black Hawk slicing over their rooftops, shattering the quiet like a bomb going off. Soldiers poured into Willow Ridge, stringing federal tape across driveways while Humvees blocked every exit. Homeowners stumbled outside in pajamas, stunned, clutching mugs that trembled in their hands. And at the center of the chaos stood Karen Mallister, silk robe, wild hair, yelling at a captain who answered her with perfect silence. He handed her a sealed packet. One glance and the color drained from her face. That's when I stepped out of the SUV. "She froze you. What did you do?" I didn't smile, Karen. "If you think this is bad, wait until you see what comes next." I first met Karen Mallister. The same afternoon, I discovered my house had been replaced by a dog park. She was holding court inside the Willow Ridge clubhouse, chin-lifted pearls gleaming, lecturing a grown man about the emotional damage caused by his non-regulation garden hose. People weren't neighbors to her. They were subjects when I stepped inside wearing my deployment uniform. She didn't bother acknowledging me. Not until I said calmly that I used to own 1428 Maple Trail. Her head jerked up like I'd insulted her lineage. "Oh," she said, flipping through a suspiciously thick file. "That abandoned lot, yes. We reclaimed it, delinquent taxes. No contact from the owner. Standard procedure." She delivered the words with rehearsed confidence. Too rehearsed. I told her I was active duty military, that my exemption was filed. She cut me off with a raised hand. "Maybe you should have stayed home and handled your responsibilities instead of disappearing overseas," she said, smiling like she'd won something. Then came the part that revealed everything. "We prefer homeowners who are present, predictable, stable." You understand, she wasn't just dismissive. She was intentional. Karen had decided soldiers didn't belong in her perfect little kingdom, and she'd taken my home to prove it. What she didn't know was that I hadn't even begun to fight back. I bought the house on Maple Trail, long before Willow Ridge became an HOA kingdom. Back then, it was just a quiet corner of town. Old trees, friendly porches. The kind of place where people waved whether they knew you or not. I chose it because it felt like home in a way nothing else had. My mom helped me move in, insisting on putting her old porch swing under the front window so she could visit through memories, even after she was gone. That swing became my anchor between deployments. It was the first thing I saw when I pulled into the driveway, a reminder that not everything in life was chaos. When I enlisted, the neighborhood still had no HOA, just a handful of volunteers who handled holiday decorations and block parties. But over the years, that small committee evolved, tightened, then hardened. Elections started, fines appeared. Rules multiplied, and eventually Karen Mallister emerged as president, self-appointed guardian of aesthetic perfection. Most people didn't fight her rise. They were busy with their lives, and she slipped into power like a fox into a henhouse. I didn't interact with her much before deployment, but I noticed things. How she frowned at my truck for being too military. How she complained about the small American flag I kept by the porch, claiming it wasn't color coordinated with the community palette. Small remarks, harmless on the surface, but laced with something colder still. I filed my military tax exemption, packed my gear, and deployed overseas, trusting that my home, my land, was safe. 11 months later, a taxi dropped me off on what I thought was my driveway. Instead, I found artificial turf, dogs sprinting where my living room once stood, and an HOA sign declaring the area Willow Ridge Community Park. It felt like I'd stepped into someone else's life. The city offices didn't help. Records showed abandoned property, delinquent taxes, and HOA reclamation, none of which made sense. But the moment I heard Karen's name, something inside me clicked. This wasn't a clerical error. It was targeted, and when she looked me in the eye, smirked, and told me the neighborhood needed predictable homeowners, I understood exactly what she'd done. That was the moment peace cracked and the war at home began. The first real hit came not from Karen, but from the system she'd quietly poisoned. I spent the entire day bouncing between city offices. Like a malfunctioning GPS, every clerk gave me a different explanation. Delinquent taxes, unclaimed property. HOA acquisition per protocol. None of it lined up with my military exemption on file. The more I asked, the more their eyes drifted toward the HOA logo, stamped across the documents. When I walked back to what used to be my yard, a couple pushing a stroller shot me a wary glance, whispering like I was trespassing on public property. A jogger swerved wide around me, eyeing my uniform like it didn't belong there. Even the dog seemed confused, sniffing at my boots as if I were the stranger. Then I saw it, a laminated notice posted on the fence. Willow Ridge Community Park. Private HOA property, private. As if my entire life had been erased and rewritten overnight. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. And I hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. The real shift happened the next day. I returned to the dog park fence to study the layout, hoping to understand how they'd rewritten my property lines. I found a fresh metal sign drilled into the post. HOA-controlled zone non-residents prohibited. Non-resident. They downgraded me from homeowner to intruder with a single plate of aluminum. As I stepped closer, a middle-aged man in an HOA windbreaker marched toward me, holding an iPad like a weapon for documentation. He muttered, snapping photos of my face, my uniform, even the boots I'd worn through Afghanistan. He didn't ask permission. He didn't need to. Karen had given him authority. Authority she never legally owned. She appeared seconds later, voice cool and sharpened. "You're causing disturbance." She said, "Leave this area immediately, or I'll call the sheriff and report an aggressive trespasser." Aggressive. I hadn't raised my voice. Hadn't moved an inch, but she knew labels stick, especially when aimed at a veteran. People didn't know I turned away before I said something I'd regret. That's when my phone pinged. A digital violation notice issued by the HOA against me. Reason: presence on restricted property, formerly associated with prior owner. Formerly, they'd already written me out of my own story. Everything felt wrong from the moment I stepped into that dog park. But it wasn't until Louise called that the picture snapped into focus. He'd heard what happened through a mutual friend and pulled an all-nighter, digging into records, something he was frighteningly good at. "Bro, this isn't incompetence." He said, "This is coordinated." Piece by piece, he laid it out. The same HOA that had slapped me with trespass warnings had quietly filed a demolition request for my home while I was in Afghanistan. My signature appeared on 2 documents I'd never seen in my life. Board meeting minutes had been created months after the supposed votes, and the land transfer a joke. Sold for $1 to a shell corporation owned by, of course, Karen's cousin. It all tracked perfectly with how she talked to me in the clubhouse. Cold, dismissive, certain I wasn't coming back. Then Louise sent the images, high-resolution satellite shots before my cottage. My mom's porch swing the tree I carved before deployment, after leveled earth bulldozer paths, fresh fencing, and the exact outline of the dog park fence already staked out. But the twist was the most damning part. The HOA filed the demolition permit 3 days after the house was already gone. They didn't just take my land, they erased the evidence, then tried to erase me. With Louise's evidence stacked on the motel desk, I made an appointment with Judge Margot Winslow, a former JAG officer who'd seen more military injustice cases than she cared to remember. The moment she flipped through the forged signatures and the demolition timeline, her expression hardened. "This isn't negligence," she said, "this is criminal fraud." For the first time since stepping onto that dog park, I felt the ground tilt in my favor. She explained that even with overwhelming proof, the HOA could drag this through civil court for years. Karen had money connections and lawyers trained to stall. But then Judge Winslow leaned back, tapped her pen, and said something almost offhandedly. "If the land is under dispute and tied to a deployed service member, federal oversight can be requested. In rare cases, even temporary occupation for assessment." It wasn't advice, it was a doorway, a legal crack wide enough to push through. And as I walked out of her chambers, one thought hit me with absolute clarity. This wasn't going to be a quiet fight. Leaving Judge Winslow's chambers, I didn't feel relief, I felt ignition. If federal oversight was even possible, then Karen had no idea how badly she'd miscalculated. I called Colonel Trent from the courthouse steps. He picked up on the first ring. "Talk to me," he said. I laid it out, the forged documents, the illegal demolition, the discriminatory emails, the HOA turning my home into a park while I was dodging gunfire overseas. There was a long silence then. A low whistle. "They did that to a deployed soldier. This wasn't an accident," I said. "They planned it, then we won't handle it quietly." Within hours, he looped in 2 federal divisions and pulled the policy Judge Winslow referenced. By nightfall, the message arrived in my inbox. APR approved temporary military assessment and training operation. Authorized on disputed property. Louise and I spent the next day marking up maps, identifying every structure tied to the fraud. The clubhouse dog park, pool expansion sidewalks, even the meditation garden Karen bragged about online. All of it built on stolen land, stamped with fake approvals. And then came the moment everything shifted. The military convoy's deployment schedule hit my phone. Dawn arrival, full occupation. Mandatory compliance, Karen had taken my home while I was at war. Tomorrow she would wake up to a war she couldn't control. The convoy rolled into Willow Ridge. Just as the sky shifted from gray to gold, engines growled through the manicured streets, rattling shutters and waking residents who thought their biggest problem would be lawn height. Soldiers stepped out unspooling federal tape across sidewalks. marking off paths, staking flags into the ground with practiced precision. And then came Karen. She burst out of her front door in a silk robe, hair unbrushed, clutching a mug that screamed Queen Bee of the Ridge. The look on her face when she saw Humvees parked across her hydrangeas was pure, unfiltered panic. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, marching toward a captain studying a map. He didn't even flinch. He simply handed her a sealed packet. Her eyes darted across the pages. Federal investigation, temporary military occupation, fraud review, illegal land seizure. The color drained from her face in real time, and that's when I stepped out of the SUV behind her. She spun around, disbelief flooding her expression. You did this." "No," I said quietly. "Your actions did this. I'm just here to watch the truth land." The neighborhood watched too, every eye turning toward the real story, finally beginning the clubhouse. Karen's personal throne room didn't look like hers anymore. Soldiers had replaced her, framed by laws with satellite maps, evidence boards, and confiscated HOA files stacked shoulder high. Residents crowded at the doorway whispering, phones recording they wanted answers. They wanted justice. A federal investigator dimmed the lights and started the presentation. The first slide hit hard my forged signatures, duplicated across multiple property transfer forms. The audience murmured, someone gasped. The second slide showed the demolition timeline. My home bulldozed weeks before any permit was requested. Karen tried to shout over it. "That's misinformation. Those documents aren't..." But the investigator clicked again. Emails appeared next. Highlighted lines glowed across the screen. "Flip his dirt fast. Military homeowners complicate uniformity. He won't come back, clear it." Karen's voice cracked. "Stop. Turn that off now." No one listened. The final blow was a video. Louise's recovered HOA meeting recording. Karen's own voice filled the room, laughing about demolishing my home while I was deployed, bragging that soldiers don't fight the HOA. They're too busy playing hero. The room erupted not in noise, but in stunned, furious silence. Every resident turned toward her. Every camera did too. Her power didn't fade. It died on the spot. The lights came back on, but Karen didn't. She stood frozen, eyes wide, mouth trembling, as the weight of her own words echoed through the clubhouse. Turned command post before she could regain her voice. A federal officer stepped forward, carrying a thick envelope. "Miss Mallister," he said calmly. "By order of the Federal Land Review Board, Willow Ridge HOA is suspended pending full criminal investigation." Her knees nearly buckled. The officer continued, each word hammering another nail into her empire fraud forgery. "Illegal demolition, discrimination against active duty military." And then came the part she feared most. "Structures built on contested land, including your residents, are subject to immediate federal audit. Occupancy is not guaranteed." A slow, horrified whisper spread through the crowd. As neighbors realized their own homes might be involved, they didn't turn to the officers. They turned to her. "You told us everything was legal." One homeowner shouted, "You lied to all of us." Another yelled. Reporters swarmed. Microphones thrust forward. Cameras flashed like lightning. Karen tried to retreat, but she had nowhere left to go. Her board members had already slipped into the background, refusing to stand beside her. Even the compliance officer who once trailed her like a shadow stepped away. I walked past her on my way out. She grabbed my arm with shaking fingers. "You ruined everything," she whispered. I met her eyes, no Karen. "You did that the moment you erased a soldier's home." And she finally broke the morning after the operation ended. Willow Ridge felt different, lighter, quieter, almost unfamiliar. And it's calm for the first time since returning home. I wasn't bracing for confrontation. I walked the perimeter of my old property, now cleared of fencing and dog park signs, and felt something I hadn't felt in months: ownership. The kind that settles in your chest, not on paper. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now approached me openly. A dad from 3 houses down shook my hand and said, "I'm sorry we didn't speak up sooner." An elderly woman brought a photo of my cottage from years back. The porch swing in full view. People weren't just apologizing. They were reclaiming their own voices. Voices Karen had muted for years. Kids rode bikes across the street without parents calling them back, in fear of HOA penalties. A couple installed wind chimes just because they finally could. The neighborhood looked almost the same physically, but the energy was unrecognizably free. And in the middle of all that relief, I felt my shoulders drop, for the first time since stepping off that taxi. The war at home had finally stopped pressing against my ribs. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was healing by the end of the week. The investigation shifted from shocking to surgical. Federal agents returned with a court order, outlining the exact charges Karen would face under U.S. law. Not vague accusations, but hard statutes with real consequences. The first charge, 18 U.S. Code, Section 1341, mail fraud. Every fraudulent notice the HOA sent through the postal carried system a potential penalty of up to 20 years per count. Karen had sent dozens second charge. Code Section 10, that to 1, falsifying federal documents, forging my signature on tax and property forms, meant up to 5 years in federal prison for each falsified filing. Third, the Service Members Civil Relief Act. A violation. Illegally seizing a deployed soldier's property wasn't just immoral. It was a federal offense. Courts routinely award triple financial damages, forced restitution, and in severe cases, criminal liability. Fourth, Civil Rights Act, housing discrimination. Her emails about keeping the neighborhood military-free triggered a Title VIII violation penalty. Massive civil fines, loss of any HOA leadership, eligibility for life, and federal oversight for all her past housing-related decisions. Fifth, state-level charges for illegal demolition, property theft, and zoning fraud. Penalties included mandatory full restitution for the demolished home, treble damages for fraudulent property transfer, possible state prison time for conspiracy and misuse of authority. When the judge finished reading the charges, the room went silent. Karen didn't just lose her title. She faced crippling fines, seizure of assets, civil liability from every affected homeowner, and years, possibly decades of accumulated prison time if convicted on all counts. It wasn't just a downfall. It was justice written line by line, in the same legal code she believed would protect her. Karen's downfall didn't arrive with handcuffs. It arrived with paperwork, mountains of it. Federal liens froze her accounts. The IRS seized her cousin. Shell companies. Civil attorneys representing 11 homeowners filed coordinated lawsuits. And because she violated the Service Members Civil Relief Act, the judge ordered immediate restitution from her personal assets. Her house, once her symbol of dominance, was placed under court-appointed receivership, meaning she could no longer legally enter without permission. When she tried to step onto her porch during a news interview, an officer stopped her and reminded her the property was now evidence. That moment went viral, but the real karma twist came a week later. During the official resurvey, federal inspectors discovered Karen's home extended 3 feet onto my restored lot. Under state law that gave me the right to demand rent, force removal of the encroaching structure, or assume ownership of the disputed portion. The neighborhood held its breath. I didn't take her land. I donated that 3-foot strip to the newly formed Willow Ridge Community Collective, the HOA free resident LED group that replaced Karen's reign. They turned it into a tiny memorial garden dedicated to military families and homeowners wronged by abusive authority. Karen watched from the sidewalk as volunteers planted flowers where her fence once stood. She couldn't say a word legally. Morally, publicly, she had lost everything. As for me, rebuilding became more than construction. Neighbors brought tools meals. Spare lumber kids painted welcome signs. Veterans showed up with gloves and silent understanding. On the first night, the porch swing was re-hung. I sat beneath the same tree that survived. Everything scarred, but standing just like me. They tried to erase my home. Instead, they rebuilt my community. And that's the kind of victory no HOA rulebook could ever contain.